Great. Well, here we are at the Heartland podcast, and we're doing this, I guess you can call it kind of an emergency podcast. We're updating on what's going on in the state legislature in Louisiana, and that's important to the nation. I think two really important bellwether states, just to get the mood of the people, would be Louisiana and South Dakota. Both states are fighting against eminent domain and fighting pipelines. But we know there's a lot of other states that are in the same situation with fighting pipelines that are going to be used to carry carbon dioxide pollution from new plastic plants, jet engine plants, jet fuel plants, all sorts of new manufacturing facilities that the carbon capture and sequestration era is heralded in. And what's going on in Louisiana is people are really fighting for their land rights. I mean, we're talking about people in rural areas who own ranches, small plots of land, and they want to feel like they have some empowerment, that there's something going on here where I, as a citizen, have rights too, not just to get rolled over by the chemical and oil industry, which so dominates in Louisiana. Now, right now, the legislature is in session, but it's a quick session and time is wasting. Michael Nichols is here with me. Michael is a biologist and rancher from Vernon Parish. He's been working with the Louisiana CO2 Alliance on this eminent domain pipeline issue, and he's going to update us on what's going on in the legislature. He's been up there time and again, talking, cajoling, testifying, and trying to get votes that will favor ordinary citizens for their rights to keep their land and their right to their own body, their own health, from toxic chemicals, to protect their aquifers. So, Michael Nichols, welcome to the Heartland podcast.
Thank you, David. It's always a pleasure, and I appreciate what you're doing by getting this information out and letting the folks know what we're all trying to work towards. Is, the American dream is really what we're talking about here. We have two important bills coming up with regards to that Thursday at the Capitol. We'll be back down there. We've made several trips down to the Capitol to fight for our rights, the citizens' rights, and have some input into this carbon dioxide, injection, as I call it. This injection wells is how they refer to it. But they did all this, the government, the state government, and our federal government did it in a vacuum and with no stakeholder meetings. So here we are now fighting for, we're kind of behind the eight ball, the citizens and our local governments. They came in and did a lot of things without even consulting we have local police juries here. So now these bills that are coming up Thursday, House Bill 250 and 251, is to return that power back to our local police juries. And so now we would have a voice, we would have a say-so. And if we issue what's called a Class 6 injection well, and even if that came, which we don't want that, we don't want any pipelines in our parish and Vernon and Boulgard parishes. But if they force this upon us through the eminent domain and things like that, we'll at least have a voice through our local officials, and we'll be able to pass ordinances. We're rural parishes, and we've never had to deal with anything like this. So we don't even have any ordinances to protect our schools and protect our communities. So hopefully those two bills will pass. That's the two parishes here where they're wanting to dump, haul the CO2 injected into underneath our Chico aquifer, our sole source drinking water supply. And we haven't hardly had, very minimal input into this process, unfortunately.
Michael, tell us specifically what HB 250 would do and HB 251.
Okay, that are bills that would bring the power back to the local governing authority to determine whether you could even issue a Class 6 well, in our parishes. So that would return the authority back to our governing body, the police jury. And then if also included in the bill if we disagree with the, let's say that for some strange reason, which I don't think this would be the case in Vernon and Beauregard, if for some strange reason that they did make a decision that we didn't like, we can get 15% of the people and have a vote on it, in the parish.
What parishes are included in the two bills?
Okay, this is Beauregard and Vernon. I have family. My children live in Beauregard Parish. We own property in Beauregard and Vernon, and so it's part of the two parishes that are just targeted to get the injection, the hazardous CO2. We don't get anything out of this. The legislature voted down today for any funding for us to fund our safety and to put money aside in case we do have contamination. So they just voted that down today in the legislature, a bill that was introduced to provide the parishes some funding.
What happened to Allen Parish?
Allen Parish, they are still their bill has not been put on the agenda. The only bills that are on the agenda right now is for Beauregard and Vernon for Thursday. They do have a bill filed, but it hasn't been placed on the agenda yet for this committee. This is a different committee that we're working with. Now this committee is, we've been working with the House Natural Resource Committee, and this is the Committee on Municipal, Parochial, and Cultural Affairs, and it's an entirely different committee. It's a more balanced committee with Democrats and Republicans. And also I feel better about, even though I'm a natural resource conservationist specialist, I feel better about working with this committee. I don't feel like they're as dominated by the oil and gas industry as the Natural Resource Committee. Ironically, it's called the Natural Resource Committee on Natural Resources and Environment. You think they would be more favorable to a natural resources conservation, person, but I'm actually looking forward to working with this different committee.
Yeah, and so what do you see the vote as right now?
Well, it's hard to say because we did get legislation through the House, even despite all the power against us and the money against us, big oil. We did get a bill out of the Natural Resources Committee that it's very restrictive with the use of eminent domain for CO2 pipelines. It's going to be debated on.
Let's segue into that because that's an update. Tell me about the bill. What bill number was it? And
okay, it's 601. It's 601 by Brett Guyman. And the first time around, it tied.
Who is Brett Guyman?
He is the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee.
Oh, that's a powerful ally.
Very powerful ally.
What's his party and where's he from?
He's a Republican from the southwest part of the state, from our area. He's like two parishes below, Calcasieu, and he does come up in the Beauregard Parish, his area. And he fought hard for us, and it tied 8-8 the first time around. But, the second time around, we worked really hard, the citizens, to work those legislators that, voted against us. And we affectionately, we nicknamed them the Dirty Eight. And we worked hard to get some of them to change their votes, and they did. I think the second vote was, I believe it was 11-4 even. We managed to change a lot of the votes over to our side when it came up again, because you're allowed to bring up the bill if it ties. You're allowed to bring it up again.
I want to get the breakdown. You'll have to help me get that breakdown. We need to really reward the elected officials who voted in favor. Now, this is HB 601, right? 601? Right. Tell me about what this bill legislates.
Okay, this bill is in respect to the eminent domain for CO2 pipelines, and what it does, it allows a very, very narrow window, if you will, for them to use eminent domain. So that will relate mostly to where they're having trouble getting a clear title. where let's say there's a piece of property that's in heirs, and it's hard to get in contact with all the heirs, which we've discussed that in the past. That would be very limited circumstances that they could use that eminent domain and go ahead and get a clear title, get access to those properties. But we would at least have more of a we'd have more of a voice in where you could place those pipelines, get them a safer distance from our residences and our communities and our schools and churches.
How does it give you in the parish, the local folks, more of a voice?
Well, if the bill passes right now, they have unlimited eminent domain right now. So, I mean, they can use eminent domain for these CO2 pipelines, and now it would be a very limited set of circumstances, where they could apply eminent domain.
That's
it would
so
change
big.
the game.
Michael, congratulations to you and your partner Roland Hollins, who is a police juror in Allen Parish. I know how hard you've been working. That is a huge, just to get it out of committee, but you've got the head of the committee supporting you. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that it's Republicans from very rural southwest Louisiana who are actually becoming the real environmentalists. It's just very ironic, I find.
It is. And it's the first time we've ever had to, this is new territory. Even for me as a conservationist, as a biologist in Louisiana, we've always worked with industry because industry is very, dominant. It's very prevalent. And you just second nature, you're raised to work with these folks. But, in conversations with people on the other side of the fence that, we've been friends our entire lives and, like consultants for ExxonMobil and those kinds of people, we're still friends. We're 180 right now on how this should happen.
Michael, as someone, listen, I come down to Louisiana quite a lot to do our foundation field work in Cancer Alley and other areas. As you know, we've met in Lafayette recently. There's one thing to work with industry, and there's another thing to give it all away. Right. And Louisiana, I'm sorry to say, but I'm saying this with a perspective, gives everything industry wants before they even ask for it. And that little crescent from Beaumont all the way through Louisiana through like New Orleans, that crescent of natural gas is going to be there for probably quite a long period of time in some shape or form. So no one is ever saying get rid of industry, but holy cow, the way the politicians right now in Louisiana are, man, they're down. I'm not going to use the expression, man, but they're giving it all away. I mean, they're not even asking for anything. And industry can be held to higher standards, be more profitable, create more jobs, and work better for citizens. So I'm just saying, Democrats don't get it at all, but it sounds like some Republicans are starting to understand things.
They are, yeah. They are, David. And just to put that in perspective from the grassroots level, when we went to Baton Rouge last time, a good friend of mine, we sat at the desk to testify, for these bills to help our citizens. And he retired from ExxonMobil. He was one of their very best drillers. He drilled one of the best oil wells ever for ExxonMobil in Alaska. And, he had nothing but good things to say about his company. They fed his family. I respect that. Yeah. He's a good friend of mine, and I didn't coach him. I don't do that to my friends.
What did he say? What was his?
He talked about how, that Exxon was a good company, and he was appreciative of the fact that he was able to raise his family and be successful. And like, he owns a ranch, he owns a cattle ranch, and he does development projects too. Like all of us have all kind of projects going on now to try to make ends meet. But he does development projects on Toledo Bend Lake. He has property up there, which is people like to flock there to fish and camp. So he's in that too. But his main focus is his cattle ranch and passing it on to his kids. And but he told them, he told him, David said, look, this is dangerous. You know, you're going to have leaks and you're going to have problems. And he said,
every engineer knows that.
You know, he told him
Every
the
engineer
truth.
knows that. There's no such thing as 100% containment.
Yeah. And I'm like, you know, look, he was trying, you know, you don't have 3 minutes to testify. And, you know, he showed me his notes and everything. And I said, well, it looks good to me. I said, I think you're speaking the truth. And that's why I asked him there. But it really put the industry on the spot, because one of their own people finally, you know, he was willing to show up. You know, he drove 3.5 hours to get to Baton Rouge in the flooding rain, you know.
Whoa,
so, and
that's a big reward there.
And you know, he has got a lot of family stuff going on. His father just passed. I mean, you know, and I asked him, I said, look, just come over there and tell them what you think, and they'll respect that. You know, oil guy, you know, without knowing me and knowing my first job out of high school was a welder's helper on pipeline in UIB, Louisiana, they're going to think I'm just some environmental wacko. And that's how they try to, you know, describe me, because I'm speaking out against them, because I agree with what you said, is we could do a lot better job. And I'm going to go ahead and say this, and you know, it's going to cause some heartburn, I understand, but they have raped our coast, you know, these oil and gas companies, and took our wealth out of the state. We've had leak after leak after leak. And, you know, it's time for those things to change. It's time for us to clean up our act and get this right for our kids and grandkids. You know, we could do a lot better. That's all I'm saying. And they don't want to hear that, but that's too bad.
Michael, when is the vote coming up for the two bills? That's HB 250 and 251?
250 and 251 by Representative Chuck Owen is coming up Thursday. We'll start debating at 9 o'clock that morning. And, you know, they have a host of bills on the agenda, so we don't know exactly what time that ours will come up, but we'll be there from can to can't and make sure that our voices are heard.
And so this is coming out of the House, correct?
It's coming out of the House. And, you know, that committee it's called the Committee on Municipal, Parochial, and Cultural Affairs, which is a new experience for me. I feel very, very competent sitting before the House Natural Resources Committee. But this debate will be about not necessarily, you know, how bad or how good this is, you know, CO2 injection. This debate will be about why we feel like we should be able to govern ourselves at the local level versus, you know, Baton Rouge telling us what to do. And I think we've got some good answers for them of why we feel like that should be the case.
We'll get a newsletter out, and, you know, you'll light a fire if you can get these passed. Other parishes will say, hey, you know, I think they're like 64 in the state, something like that.
That's over 60. Correct. 64 parishes. That's correct.
And so the other ones are going to say, hey, we got to have these rights too. Livingston, Tangipahoa, St. James, St. John, St. Charles, New Orleans, you know, so let's folks, I really want to thank Michael for coming here late at night. This is an emergency podcast, but there are important and urgent things happening in our country. And these are for the people. And we need to be aware of these things. Michael Nichols, thank you for coming tonight on the Heartland podcast, and we'll keep the people updated. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. Appreciate you.